All right, it's another cold, snowy day here, but not cold enough to stop us from starting our soil mix. All right, so just to give you an idea of how hot these things get, even in very cold, so it's not even above freezing, but even with the sun out hitting, it is about 84 degrees in here. Sun's not fully up in the sky where it's going to hit it at a much better angle. So it's probably going to be closer to the 90s, 100 in a little bit. And also to give you an idea, even though it is very warm in here, not much effect on the temperature. So the airspace is warm, but the cold sink has much more colder temperatures that it's going to take a lot more energy from the sun to alter the temperature of the soil, which is why we do cold frames and all that. All right, so I buy the components to the soil, but not as the pre-mixed, and we'll go through why the certain ones I buy for our soil mix. So you can use the soil on your own land, but it may not be as good, especially when you're starting seeds. So if you look at the soil that we've used, nice airy spongy material, nice and black. Our soil in Connecticut is not so good, so if I dig beneath the soil that we put on top of this, you see it's, I can't really tell too much, it's certainly less brown, it's clumpy, it's rocky. Even when I push it together in a fist here, it doesn't really break up nicely, it's not spongy. So you can have a real issue with compaction. Remember, seedlings have those very new roots that need to grow through this. There's a grub. And if it's too compact, it won't. This sort of material also won't retain nutrients. It will leach it and will just become compact. So it's not really a good medium to grow your seeds. And you really want something like this to make sure those little seedlings grow into the plants that you do want. So like I said, you can buy pre-mixed ones at Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever it may be. I buy the components and then make my own, just so I have more flexibility. I know what's going in there. It's no different than cooking your own food. So you know what's going in. You can alter the ingredients to whatever you need it to be. So I would say I separate whatever I buy into two areas, one for nutrients and one for air and water. So I use peat moss and perlite. So neither really provide any nutrients. If I'm not aware of too much going in from these two, but what they do provide is, as it already says on the back here, prevent soil compaction. Perlite, so there's two things you can buy. You can either buy perlite or vermiculite. I go with perlite, so it does not allow for soil compaction. So it is actually mined volcanic rock that they just heat to a high temperature, and it kind of explodes up into what I would say probably very similar like styrofoam. And within those little beads are little pores which can retain water as well as oxygen. So it's not as good as vermiculite to retain water, but it's good enough. You'll see when you work in these closed greenhouse environments, it gets quite humid in here, and I have a real trouble with fungus and dampening off. So I do not want my seed trays to have very moist soil. I want it just enough where there's enough water in there to help support the seedling grow. So perlite is very good for that. So it helps with the water somewhat, but certainly with the compaction and allowing aeration into your soil mixture. I also use peat moss. So this is also providing very little nutrients into it, but very good for water retaining. So both of these together really help the seedlings stay moist. They don't dry out too quickly, and you don't have to water them every day. So that's very good for these ones. So then to provide the nutrients for your seedling, you use compost. I ran out of all my compost that I had this year, so I just had to buy some. So obviously this is going to provide a majority of your macro and micronutrients for your seedling. I do put a little more into there just to make sure everything is there, since I want the seedlings to grow as best as possible. And since you use peat moss, it can be a little acidic. So I also put some pulverized lime in there. So you can buy it either in the pellet or like this. You really want to buy this to help its solubility within the soil mix. So it does do that. So it does basify any sort of acid in the soil. So the mixture that I use for these, I just use buckets. So this is just a 5 gallon, this is a 2.5 gallon. So I use 1 bucket of the peat moss. I use 1 bucket of the perlite. I use 1 bucket of the compost. And then I use the little cup in here. I use 2 cups of the fertilizer and 1 cup of the lime. So you throw everything in here. You probably want to do this outside the greenhouse since it's very dusty. You don't want to be breathing in that. So you put everything in here, mix it all up really good. And the one thing that people don't note, but should be done, before you put it into your seed trays, you really want to make sure that mixture is nice and moist. So do not put the dry mixture into your seed trays. You'll see that the perlite and the peat moss are not something that readily absorb the water. What actually happens, it actually just bubbles up on top. And it takes a while to actually absorb like a sponge into the soil mix. Which then causes stuff to float. So if you have seeds up on top of your mixture, you'll have them actually floating in the water until the water slowly drains down into that. So it's easier to make it moist, not dripping with water, just moist enough so when you put it in and then you put your seeds in and then you put your water on top of it, everything is a lot easier to work with at that stage. So we're gonna make that. I'm gonna make my seedling mix. I'm gonna put it into my seed buckets today, and then we're gonna start using our seed trays. So everything's mixed. Everything's good to go. It's very dry. That's the way it should be. If I try compacting, it really doesn't do that. Or it doesn't stay like that. And that's really the intention of using the peat moss and the perlite, that the soil doesn't compact. You will have the air going in through there. You'll have the soils being able to get through a non-compacted mix. And it'll be very good for the roots themselves. So remember, given that this is very dry, do not just put this into your seed trays as is. You'll need to wet it down to a moist consistency, and I can show you the reason why right now. All right, so I just took a potting container I had, put the seed mix in. You see it's nice and fluffy, not compact. So if I just take that, have my seed into it, and then put my water on top, when this mix is dry, you see how the water doesn't very quickly absorb into that. It will eventually, but it struggles initially. So you want to have it moist before you do this, because if you had your seed in here, it's most likely going to be floating in this mix, and you're not going to have the setup that you wanted before, where the seed is in there and the soil is there. So if you just hold it for a little bit, you're going to start seeing the drips. It's essentially what you want. I don't want this mixture 100% holding on to this liquid, because I don't want that moisture in this environment, because that is what causes that fungus growth. So that's why I use the perlite, and everything drains with that. So just make sure you moist the mix before you do everything, and then you can water thereafter. All right, so that's what we do for our setup here. I do it purposely, not only for the flexibility and what goes into the soil mix or the seed mix, but also for the cost. If I were to buy just the bags itself, it would probably be 2 to 3 times more, and this little more work associated with it, but it is more cost effective for everything that we use here. So for just the mix, so that one part of the orange with the other parts of the blue, you fill up 1/2 of this and you kind of smush it together. So you get about 18 gallons of seed mix just doing that recipe twice over. So once I fill up both of these, we'll have plenty of material to work with our seed trays. So we'll continue on from there.